Hey guys, so I want to share with you something pretty deep that I experienced about 4 years ago, which was an awakening experience that came about from suffering. Now, interestingly, I didn't really know that you could have this. I didn't know that it was possible for something like suffering to actually cause an awakening. But as it turns out, suffering is a genuine spiritual tool. And I want to share with you guys a little bit about what I went through and also what I learned with this experience that I had. So as you can imagine, what sparked this for me in the first place was some pretty deep suffering. Now, I'm very lucky in that usually I don't have too much of this in my life. I'm very, very, very grateful for my circumstances. However, at this particular time, I'd kind of lost myself. I'd fallen off my path, and I was doing things that I wouldn't normally do. Now, this is interesting because I'm the kind of person that to keep myself happy, healthy, and sane, I'm always doing things that involve, good structure, good routine, good discipline. Maybe you're the same. But during this time, I was in a bit of a mini depression and I didn't really care anymore. I wasn't really interested in doing any of those things. And I felt like I just needed to stop everything and let myself feel the suffering. Now, at first, I was a little bit concerned because when you don't do the things that you know you need to do to keep yourself happy and healthy, you can kind of expect to feel yourself a little bit off your game, less conscious, less present. But for me, how I was feeling was like that didn't even matter anymore, and that I just needed to take a break, even from being me, right? And so I just decided to stop doing everything for about a day or two, including my good habits. And I knew that this would cause me some suffering, but for some reason, I didn't really mind, which is a weird thing to say because, normally we do everything we can to avoid suffering. But for some reason, I didn't really feel like resisting it. And instead, I actually kind of wanted it, almost like it's what I needed to have in that moment. So on top of this, I did actually let myself do the things which I wouldn't normally ever do. And this involved having a relapse and also making some poor lifestyle decisions. Now, this might not sound too bad, but the truth is suffering is relative. And for me personally, it's incredibly, incredibly important that I keep PMO, pornography, completely out of my life. Because, everyone has a thing, including me. And, something that you just can't do, because if you were to do that thing, it would completely throw you off your game and mess up your mind and your life. Now, what's really fascinating that happened here was because I'd introduced this one thing that I know I can't do into my experience, the kind of suffering that came about from it afterwards was so strong, so intense, that weirdly enough, it caused me to become very, very conscious, right? So becoming a higher level of consciousness. And you'd think here that suffering would do the opposite. You'd think that suffering would make you feel less conscious, more closed off, more resistant. But what's interesting that I found here is that there was a kind of inflection point where because the suffering was so intense and so full on, there was a kind of breakthrough that took place. For example, I don't know if you ever had this experience where because you feel such strong emotion, weirdly, you feel quite calm. Well, it was a little bit like that, but it wasn't emotion that I was feeling. It was more of this suffering that I was feeling. However, just to step back for a sec, the good thing about this suffering and this kind of mini depression that I was in is that it was very, very short, only there for a few days, but it was super intense and super full on. And looking back, I almost feel like it was kind of like the universe had saved this specific window of time to just blast me with all of the suffering that I needed to kind of catch up on, like it was my karma. And because it was like this, I felt like all I could really do was just surrender to it, because I knew that it was like a storm that was passing through me. And so I knew to just let it be there. And as soon as I did this, as soon as I surrendered to it, I just started to feel this peace come over me. Like I wasn't really myself anymore, the ego. Like I was free from myself. And in retrospect, it was like the reason it felt like this was because I was living in such a way that I would just never normally live in. And because I was doing the one thing that I just would never normally do, I felt like I was having a bit of this ego death, right? A little bit like I'd let myself die because I'd gone into this space which the Seb ego just could not exist in. But because he was there, and because he'd surrendered, it was perfect. And it was completely okay. In other words, if you can let yourself go to a place within, and a place that you never thought you could let yourself go, what may happen is you may experience a kind of shift in consciousness. because you're taking your ego to a place where it basically cannot survive. And as a result, you may break through. Now, of course, you can resist it. Most people will. And if you do that, you're going to have a really difficult time. But if you surrender to it and drop into your higher self, you can experience some freedom. So this is where things kind of began, but they did actually go deeper. And this was when I started to contemplate. So what I did was I started to ask myself some really profound, really heavy questions. And I don't know if you've done this before, but when you're in this kind of existential state of mind, the type of things that cross your mind are not just normal, shallow things, but rather they might be the things that you might normally avoid. So things that you might subtly push away in your normal everyday life. But now that you've broken through, your ego, it's not resisting these things anymore. And so you can kind of just chill with them and basically be radically honest with yourself. And so what happened with me here was, because I was being so raw and so honest with myself, having kind of shed so much of this egoic resistance, what was actually answering the questions that I was asking was not me, but the higher self. And so I got some really deep existential insights, one of them being, when you find yourself being pushed to the brink of suffering, and then you surrender, what happens is God always shows up. And by God, I mean higher states of consciousness. And you may have seen this before in your life, when your ego just has nowhere to run, nowhere to go. You may experience higher awareness. Because, the false you, the false self, the ego, it just cannot survive. And so naturally you feel this strange level of awareness, this kind of weird detachment from everything. Your higher self steps in, and deep down you know in that moment that everything is absolutely okay. So with this higher self answering all of my questions, one of the most profound answers that I got when I was contemplating is when I asked this question, what makes a good life? What should you have or do that is more important than anything else? Is it working out? Is it meditating? Is it having good relationships? And the answer I got here was that out of everything in your entire life, the thing that makes the most difference to you is your level of consciousness. And it was so unbelievably clear to me that this was the case, because I was seeing it firsthand. I was personally doing everything that I wouldn't normally do, everything that would normally make me feel bad and throw me off my game. And yet still I felt completely okay, completely at peace. Why? Well, because I was in a very high state of consciousness. Now, having this experience, it really made me think. Because, as mentioned earlier, things like training, discipline, routine, these things, they seem like they're the most important things for us to do. And, perhaps they are on a worldly level, But what I gained insight into was how even if you do the opposite of these things, it's still possible to feel completely okay. And that's because with enough consciousness, everything is seen and felt to be perfect, right? And if you're curious about how you would integrate this into your life, it's when you find yourself in those really difficult moments where you just need to take a break. You need to let yourself, slack off, enjoy some worldly pleasures. Now, normally indulging in these kind of things, they might make you feel bad. But if you're applying what we're talking about here, you can actually surrender into your suffering and be deeply aware throughout everything that you're doing. So we might call this conscious suffering. And because life is full of suffering anyway, this is a really, really good thing to learn and to integrate. So to continue my experience, guys, because I was in this higher state of consciousness, the fact that I was doing stuff that I wouldn't normally do didn't even matter anymore. Everything was okay. And I realized that I could literally relapse again and that would be perfect. And it was so weird for me because the kind of standards that I hold for myself around NoFap, even back then, like 4 years ago, were extremely high. And so for me to have this kind of leniency with myself was, unusual, but also extremely liberating. Because when you finally just let go of your own standards and accept yourself completely and wholly, no matter what, you just feel so relaxed, you feel so happy, because you're not playing games with yourself anymore. You're just letting yourself be in any way that you need to be, and then accepting that as perfect. So to really emphasize this, guys, the things that I would normally consider to be unhealthy distractions, with this level of consciousness, I actually knew that they would be more than okay. I actually knew that they would be perfect. And that it wouldn't make a big difference. It wouldn't make any difference in the grand scheme of things. Because in the bigger picture, in the context of infinite consciousness, it doesn't mean anything. In fact, to assign meaning to a thing, and then to think that that's actually real, to me felt so silly, so ignorant. Because me being conscious, I realized that even calling a relapse bad, it's just a relative judgment. It's not some absolute truth. And I knew that I had this perspective, and I knew that I had this clarity because I was in this higher state of consciousness. It was the only way that it could have worked. Now, something that's really meaningful to me that I want to share with you guys is anytime I've ever had an awakening experience like this, or a high consciousness breakthrough, it always goes down as one of the best moments of my entire life. Because in my experience, you finally get it. You finally feel what you want to feel. Because we always talk about things in life that are not it. How sex is not it. Money is not it. Fame is not it. But you know what is it? God is it. Awakening is it. Love is it. And when you wake up and realize yourself as the whole universe, you feel this. And there's just nothing else like it. However, until you get this for yourself, it's just so easy to remain lost, confused, and searching for it in things that are not it. So worldly and material things, mostly. And the truth is, this is the struggle that we're all in. It's the search for God, something higher, but our ignorance makes us look in the wrong places and in the wrong things. Whereas the more we awaken, the more we raise our consciousness, the more we can see how it is found within ourselves. So really, we're just lacking the deep paradigm shifts and the deep consciousness shifts, which are possible if we keep going and if we keep awakening. So now to give you guys some final takeaways. Yes, suffering can be used for spiritual awakening, but you should never impose it on yourself. Instead, take really good care of yourself, love yourself, and if you can, try to awaken gradually in a stable and in a conscious way, ideally by doing consistent spiritual practice. So meditation, contemplation, yoga, silence, plant medicines, retreats, breath work, and all the other spiritual tools and techniques that you can do safely and sustainably. Right? You've got to take care of yourself on this path, guys. And the time to use suffering for awakening is only when you have no other option. And when it comes into your life and you can't really do anything else but face it. So remember that, guys. Take really good care of yourself and good luck with all of your spiritual work. My final message is that if you need any support, any assistance on your path, I do offer coaching. And so if you feel inspired, if you feel connected to my message, feel free to check out my website in the description. I do offer a free discovery call if you're curious. And so just click below if that's something you're interested in. Otherwise, if you've enjoyed this one, guys, and you would like more, then my friends, please do subscribe.